before I got pregnant and stuff, like I love to travel. I would go all over the place, and it wasn't like I was a stamp chaser. But if I was like, feeling for a little vacation or a friend having a birthday somewhere cool or whatever, I would be the first to be like, I'm there, I'm coming. Um, and when I had my daughter, I knew two things. One, I didn't want that aspect of my life to change. And two, I wanted her to kind of benefit from that exposure as early in her life as possible. Um, so I knew those things kind of going in. So from a reward perspective, I feel, for lack of better words, I feel proud.
Welcome to Travel Love Legacy, a podcast that highlights and celebrates the experiences of Black and Brown families who use travel as a means to create and build legacy. Hear the stories of Black and Brown parents who are building a nest egg of long-lasting memories, resiliency, and worldly perspectives for their young ones. I'm Melanie, the host and creator, the Trinidadian Canadian mother of a pink-obsessed and awe-inspiring princess. Travel Love Legacy is a collection of stories that serves to inspire those who are yet to take the leap, so together we can leave behind a world filled of Black and Brown global citizens.
On today's episode of Travel Love Legacy, I bring to you the story of Marielle des Etages. Marielle is a marketing professional who shares her experience growing up in Trinidad, studying in the US, and eventually moving to the UK as a solo parent. She discusses the many challenges and rewards of traveling solo with a child and the importance of flexibility. We go into detail about how her motivations for travel have changed throughout the years, from traveling to see people to now traveling to see places. My interview with Marielle hits for me on so many personal levels, and I cannot wait for you to hear how this brave woman has embraced risk-taking. I began the interview as I usually do, asking Marielle to introduce herself and give us a bit of a snippet of her professional and educational background.
So my name is Marielle des Etages. I am from Marabella in southern Trinidad and Tobago. um, I work in marketing. Born and raised in Trinidad, went to school in the US, and my tertiary education was all in the United States, but have worked professionally both in Trinidad and in other countries as well.
I then asked Marielle to describe her early childhood experiences and memories with travel.
My mom's perspective when it came to tertiary education was that you grew up your whole life in Trinidad, there's more to education than what is in the book, and you need to have exposure that is beyond this country. So she made it a point actually for us to go abroad to study. That was like a goal. And then as the youngest, it never crossed my mind that I would even go to UE because I'm the youngest of five. The eldest one went to Pace in New York. My brother went to UE Mona in Jamaica. The other ones went to the States as well. So it was always like, okay, I guess when I reach Form 6, I'll have to study for the SATs, and I will also be heading off to the States to go to school. Plus, my mother was very strict, so getting out of the country was a way to get away from her as well. And so it was always the plan. So, yeah, I studied for SATs and, looked up schools. There used to be a book. I can't even remember the name of the book. You used to get it from the Ministry of Education. You could see all the schools that are ranked in the States. And we went through that book and I started doing applications and I got through with a few schools with some scholarships. Mommy told me Howard is off the table because they have so many Trinis in Howard. You might as well go to UE. So, based on all of those things, I ended up at Drexel in Philadelphia.
I asked Marielle to talk us through her journey from leaving life in Trinidad.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I even chose that school was that, like, my older sisters, they all went to school in New York or New Jersey. And that's because my mom is from a very big family of 10. And of those 10 children, only three of them stayed in Trinidad. So, like, most of my aunts and uncles moved to New York and New Jersey. So, for me, I wanted to go to the States, but I also didn't want to live with an aunt or uncle. I wanted to have the experience of kind of being on my own, but close enough to a network. And how Philadelphia ended up happening was that one of my sisters was actually in graduate school at Temple in Philadelphia. So she was kind of like the closest family, but Philly is not far from like New Jersey and stuff. So if you really needed like a super grown adult, you could still like hop on a train and get to an aunt or get to an uncle. But it was an experience of kind of coming into your own and becoming an adult, for me in that context, which was very good. It didn't have much of a Trini network at the school that I went to, but there was a pretty healthy Caribbean population. So it's like in the Caribbean Students Association. At our school, it was called WISE, West Indian Student Establishment. And we would have like fetes and things. So, you still had a bit of culture, but a lot of my good friends were either first generation American or just like American, or African, or, it was a pretty diverse, it wasn't a diverse school, but all of the people that were minorities stuck together. That's how I should put it.
So what happens next? I asked Marielle to talk about what transpired after she graduated from her U.S. university.
After undergrad, so the school I went to, they have what's called a co-op program, which is like paid internship as part of the education system. So through that program, I actually got a full-time offer for employment, which to me was like amazing. Because when I left Trinidad, I was like, I'm never going back. I'll go to visit, but I'm not going back to Trinidad to live. I found my place, and then I didn't get the work visa. So they applied for it for me before I graduated, and we didn't get through. And we thought like, okay, well maybe it's because you actually don't hold a degree yet, so we'll try again. So there was a 6-month gap between when my student visa was going to be finished and when we would know um, about the work visa being approved. And in that 6-month period, I went to Southampton, UK to stay with my brother. He needed help with my nephews, and I was kind of like, well, I'd rather be with a sibling while I see if I can get back rather than come back home because, I was still avoiding Trinidad at the point. So I lived in the UK for 6 months and, helped with my nephews, and I had started like a master in science program at that point and was just kind of, doing stuff. Um, and the work visa still didn't come through. So after the second time it didn't come through, so I realized, okay, well, I guess this is it. I'm going back to Trinidad and we'll see how that is. But it was really a blessing.
So at this point, Marielle then made the decision to move back to Trinidad. Here, she talks about her experience living and working in Trinidad as an adult and how the decision turned out to be a major turning point in her life.
Because my experience in Trinidad as an adult, even in my strict parents' home, was completely different as a child growing up. I mean, I had to have some heart-to-hearts because, your parents will always see you as their baby, right? So I had to have some heart-to-hearts, like, guys, like, I've been living on my own now for about 6-7 years, like, ease me up now. And they're like, well, okay, it's true, we hadn't considered that and different things like that. But it was like a very pivotal moment for our relationship as parents and child. So it was really good. And I got to reconnect with a lot of friends from like convent days and things like that, that are still part of my network now. So like I really appreciated that. What I thought was like a horrible thing, I really appreciate it now, I should say.
At this point of the interview, I asked Marielle to take a moment and reflect on the travel journeys that she's had thus far, to perhaps summarize some of the experiences and how her interests have changed throughout the years.
even before I left for university, I did the Grenada trip. I used to study French, so I'd been to Martinique. I went to Dominica on a geography trip and different stuff like that. So I had the little travel blog. I liked seeing new places. And while I was in the US, I mean, the US is vast, right? So you're not leaving the country, but you could see a lot of different places just within the US itself. So I would go on road trips with friends, or you might catch a little small flight somewhere, or anything like that. So um, my hunger, I guess, for travel just became more. And I wanted to see more and more of the world and of the people that were out there. And coming back to Trinidad, um, I was in a pretty serious relationship in university. So, like, my focus was on the US because he was in the US. I was like, I need to get back to the US and stuff like that. So, it was always about trips to the US at that point in time because that was my focus. Um, but yeah, I think in that it was about 2 years. In that 2 years that I was in Trinidad between undergrad and graduate, I think I only traveled to the States. I didn't go anywhere else at that point in time, um, because it was all about the people in my life at that point. Even though travel was an aspect, it was more about traveling to see those people versus traveling to see the world. And that has also shifted since then as well.
So Marielle just described a pivotal shift from traveling to see people versus traveling to see the world. I then asked her to describe the impacts that this shift had on her life.
The shift, I think, really happened in graduate school because I started going to places where I knew no one. So I was part of a group in graduate school that was it was like a consulting. It was an MBA program, and there was basically a consulting student organization. And what we would do is it was called Project Nicaragua, and we would go to Nicaragua and teach classes. So basically, you were teaching your first year MBA curriculum to small business owners in Nicaragua, and we would also give them basic. So they paid for the classes, but in return, they would get pro bono consulting from the students and the professors that were part of it. And I was consulting chair of that while I was in school. So I'd been to, I don't even know, probably 6, 7 times I had been to Nicaragua during grad school. And as part of it, it would be, yes, the education part, but they'll take you to sightsee and see different parts of the country and stuff. And like Nicaragua actually reminded me of postcards of old Trinidad. And I used to be like, it's so wild because the country has a completely different history, but well, not completely, but different history, different people, but something about it feels kind of like home. Yeah, so that kind of got me thinking, like, wow, it's amazing how when it comes down to the fabric of it, we're all kind of the same. And because I had gone so many times, our translator and I actually became really good friends. And he would always tell me that he wanted to take me to Bluefields, which is the English Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, because he's like, you literally look like the people from Bluefields, and like they listen to soca and dancehall and reggae. And he's like, yes, they speak English and Spanish. He's like, it's like in a different country. And that never happened while I was in grad school. So one of the top things on my list when I was like looking at solo travel and trying to see the world and see things was to go to this place that he had told me about. And that was the first actual kind of solo. It's a solo trip because I went by myself, but he met me to take me around and show me and stuff. And that really started to open my eyes to like different parts of the world and different cultures and things like that. And then once you kind of pop the proverbial like cherry of traveling alone, it becomes so much easier. After that trip, I was like, I want more. Where else am I going to go? And I just wanted to go to places and see places, and it no longer became about, well, I have nobody to go with. It was just like, actually, if the place is safe and you have all your things in check, you have a place to stay, and you're vigilant about your surroundings and your safety, like you should be anyway, you'll be fine. So that was kind of the shift.
We then got on to discussing Marielle's travels after Nicaragua. I asked her what motivated her solo journeys beyond this point.
After that Nicaragua trip, it kind of made me feel a lot more comfortable about just traveling on my own. Because, sometimes it's going to sound a little silly, but sometimes you like watch a movie. Mine was Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, right? And I was like, what is this place? I've never seen buildings like this before. Where are these huge jasmine trees? Like, what is this? And I like Googled it and it was like, oh, Angkor Wat Temple Complex, Cambodia. So then that was a place on my list that I wanted to see with my own eyes, right? So it would be things like that, or like somebody might mention, like, oh, have you seen the floating villages? I'm like, wow, this is like, yes, I want to see all these places. So like it just started like kind of building up a list. And to be honest, a lot of that list I still haven't hit yet. Um, but it made those types of goals feel more tangible and real and attainable. Whereas before it was like, oh wow, it would be really nice to get to that place, but never really thinking it was achievable or that you would actually do it. So that was kind of where the shift for me happened in terms of kind of traveling really to see the world and see places a bit more.
This is a part of Marielle's story where it takes a turn and lands her in the UK. So I asked her, how did the move from Trinidad to the UK come about?
And then in terms of how I got to the UK, which is where I am now, um, I worked many years in North Carolina after graduate school. Um, and again, some immigration issues, and my green card this time didn't come through. But there were a lot of things happening personally in Trinidad and stuff at the time that I kind of took it as a moment to say, you know what, this is probably a good time to go back home and support my family and kind of do my own thing for a little bit. So I came back, was working for an international company, but working remotely in Trinidad, and left that and kind of did my own thing entrepreneurially for a while. While I was here, I think I traveled to the States a bit. I want to say I went somewhere else, but I cannot remember where, to be honest. I'm pretty sure I took a few other trips, but I cannot remember. Um, but I was here supporting my family and stuff. And then during COVID is when I got pregnant and have my daughter. Um, and you know, when you have a child, it completely shifts priorities and things for you. And one of the things that, of course, became most important was stability. Um, and being an entrepreneur is a lot of freedom, but literally you eat what you kill. And I needed to be in a situation where if I'm lazy that month, or I'm not performing my best that month because I'm stressed out or whatever reason, that a paycheck is still going to come so that I can feed my family. So I decided I was going to get back into the corporate world, and that opportunity came through one of my consulting jobs with my old company as a position in the UK. So I decided to take the leap and go back to corporates and migrate again, and that's how I ended up in London. Yeah.
I found this part of Marielle's story very intriguing and relatable as I asked her what were some of the challenges she experienced making the move to London, both from a cultural, personal, and professional level.
From a cultural perspective, um, it's always a funny thing, because places like London and New York, like London, and then like mid-Atlantic region of the US, there are a lot of people with Trinidadian heritage. But the reality is, a first generation Trinidadian born and raised in London or born and raised in the US is culturally similar because of their parents, but they're very different from someone who's born and raised in Trinidad. So that's always been not a struggle per se, but there's things that you just can't quite connect on because they do have the experiences that you have. You don't have the experiences that they have. You both have a love for soca and curry, but so that is a little bit of a struggle. And then for me, the communities, and I don't know all of them, but like Brixton, for example, big Caribbean community in Brixton in the UK. But as a single mom who is a foreigner with a young little girl, I didn't feel comfortable moving to Brixton. So I live in an area where there's hardly any Caribbean people living. So like even to find seasoning and things like that, making my own seasoning or paying pong and a krong for chief on Amazon so I could get green seasoning, like little things like that, right? So culturally, it could be a little bit of a struggle, but luckily, I do have a second cousin who is relatively close by, much older, but close by. And I have a first cousin who is exactly what I just described. He's a first generation. He's not even full Trini, but half Trini, British, but he's traveled to Trinidad and, kind of knows and stuff. So I have a little bit of that, but the struggle culturally is that really I don't have a network of people with a shared experience of like kind of growing up in Trinidad and kind of thing like that around me. Personally, loneliness is real in any big city. People think that, oh, there are more people, so there's more opportunity for connection, but I actually think it's the opposite in a way because there's so many people that it's just noise almost, and nobody is really making links with anybody else. Everybody kind of stays to those that they know. So kind of making your new network and stuff take some time and it's a bit slow. I'm only now kind of starting to make friends and it's almost 2 years in. So that's personally. And then professionally, that bit is not as much of a culture shock because not in a way, I work for the company that acquired my old company, so there it's not a complete culture shock in terms of professionally the business that I'm in. What's very interesting is that I work for a British company, but I work with probably 2% of the team is probably British. It's super multicultural, multinational, like Russians, Ukrainians, because it's a big multinational company. So it's like lots of people from lots of end markets all over the world that come to the headquarters to work. So I think right now on my team, we have two Brits, and then we have Brazilians, Russians, Ukrainians, Colombians, like South Africans. It's a whole mix. So that's really cool, actually. I really enjoy that because we'll talk about the things that are similar in our culture, the things that are not what they call the fruits that we call, Just the other day I learned that, hey, South Africans is called popo too. I never met another country that's called it popo, but they call it popo too, So like things like that. So that's been my experience so far, and I'm sure it's going to continue to grow and change as I stay there longer and longer. But honestly, so far so good. It's just kind of the growing pains of being in a new environment.
We interrupt the story to deliver a very important message. If you're liking what you're hearing and want to learn more, please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review. Anything you can do to help us out would be greatly appreciated, as your support will go a long way in keeping this podcast alive. Thank you. Let's face it, it's harder to move countries as an adult than it would if you were younger. So I asked Marielle whether or not making the move was something she ever second-guessed.
Preparing to leave, I was like, oh, am I doing the right thing? And I had friends that would ask me like, yeah, you sure? Like, you don't know anybody there? And I was like, well, I know a few people and things. And they're like, yeah, but you're leaving your dad. And, my mom was very sick at the time as well. And, like, even though I'm a single parent, like I still have a very strong network in Trinidad for me and my daughter. And then I was moving away from that very strong network to kind of figure things out. So that was very scary. But ultimately, I decided that the risk was worth it because what I needed was to have maximum stability and maximum potential for future growth. And I didn't see that being as easily attained with what I was doing in Trinidad as it would be um, in this opportunity in the UK. Even if it doesn't pan out to be exactly what I'm doing now, I think that making that move was positioning me for a launch pad that could lead to much bigger things that will ultimately help support me and my daughter much better than anything that I could have done entrepreneurially in Trinidad at the time.
We now move on to the topic of solo parenting and travel. And I asked Marielle to comment on how she sees traveling as a solo parent different or unique in terms of its challenges and rewards.
Before, as you heard from the story, right? Before I got pregnant and stuff, like I love to travel. I would go all over the place, and it wasn't like I was a stamp chaser. But if I was like, I'm feeling for a little vacation or a friend having a birthday somewhere cool or whatever, I would be the first to be like, I'm there, I'm coming. Um, and when I had my daughter, I knew two things. One, I didn't want that aspect of my life to change. And two, I wanted her to kind of benefit from that exposure as early in her life as possible. Um, so I knew those things kind of going in. So from a reward perspective, I feel, for lack of better words, I feel proud that, that my daughter has, people always, I feel so good. People always compliment me on the plane, like, oh my God, she's such a good flyer. She's not like balling down the place. I'm like, she has her moments, but they're like, no, she's so good. Or people go, oh my God, there was a child sitting in the seat. I didn't even realize, and those things make me feel good. Like when she's like, oh, look, mommy, we're going on the plane. Let me get in my seat. I want to buckle my own seatbelt. Those things make me feel good because I feel like she's becoming a seasoned traveler. She's learning the etiquette of travel, but also she's getting the kind of exposure that, for me, I was maybe, 10, 9, 10 when I started getting that kind of exposure. She's getting it now as a toddler, I guess. And as much as we like to think those things they don't remember, she may not remember it as an adult, but I think the lessons and the small things you learn about people and cultures, and there are people that are different from you, and here people do this and there people do that. Those things help shape an open-mindedness and a humility in a human being that I think is never too early to kind of start with that. So I feel that's one of the biggest rewards, really. There are so many aspects of traveling as a solo parent that, like, the pros and cons of traveling solo actually kind of apply. So for example, you want to plan your trip, you want to go somewhere, you want to do something, you want to make your schedule. The reality is your 1-year-old is not going to say, I don't want to go to whatever tour you want to go to. So you can kind of just do whatever schedule you want to do. The catch with it is you're a solo parent and your needs, while they are important, cannot trump ultimately the needs of your child. Or sometimes there might just be some things that are just not practical. Like, for example, I would love to go to Porto, Portugal. You know, Porto sounds amazing. But I read that Porto is one of those cities that has a lot of stone, hilly streets and a lot of staircases. And I'm a solo parent with an almost 30-pound toddler. So I'm like, in reality, is this going to be an enjoyable trip with her at this age? Probably not, because if she's sleeping or she gets tired or whatever, I'm going to be the one that is toting this child up and down these stairs. So we're going to have to save that trip until she's a bit more self-sufficient. So it's like things like those little small nuances that you have to think about that you wouldn't have before. Um, and then I think another challenge perhaps of traveling as a solo parent is like just the practicalities of managing all of your luggage on your own, managing, because you would like to think people help, but people don't. Very rarely people do, and I think it's because they want to mind their business for the most part. But you need to be able to manage it all on your own and figuring out how to do that and figuring out the system that works for you takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice. Yeah.
Coming from personal experience as a solo parent, the challenge of traveling with a child on your own is very daunting. So I asked Marielle to provide her biggest tips for those solo parents who may be hesitant but are seriously considering traveling with their children.
I would say, well, one, you can. It is not without stress. That would be a lie. It is a bit stressful, particularly the journey. Particularly the journey. It can be stressful. But I say plan ahead, but don't overcommit to your plan because children are unpredictable. And if you overcommit to the plan, you're probably going to stress yourself out and the child out. Like, be flexible, make a plan, but like, if things change, go with the flow and do what makes sense. Um, People like to say pack lightly. I say pack tightly. Figure out a way to pack everything you need and everything they need into one suitcase. Try as best to keep it under 50 pounds so you don't have to pay the extra. But if you can get it in one suitcase, it means you could hold a little child hand or push a stroller with one hand and roll a suitcase with the other, which is probably the biggest tip, honestly. I use packing cubes like a champ and I squeeze everything I can into a large suitcase and I prop my travel car seat on the top and I'm rolling the 2-year-old in the stroller and I'm rolling that suitcase in the left hand and there we go. And I could manage all of that on my own without any help from anyone. If I get help, it's a great bonus. But I managed to get everything in. I say, what's another tip? When I'm coming home, for example, I come home probably 2 or 3 times a year. Two for sure, because I always come for carnival. I always come around October. I actually leave some clothes in Trinidad because it's home. It's my parents' house. Like, so I leave clothes. If you're going to a place where you travel too often, I would say if you have the opportunity, leave some staples there. Like, don't pack every single possible thing that you're going to need. They have pharmacies and stuff wherever you're going to go. You don't need to pack 2 packs of Pampers. You pack enough for the first 3 or 4 days, and then you could buy Pampers. There are babies everywhere, So little things like that actually help a lot in the packing tightly concept. I learned that after a few trips. I'm like, why am I filling up this entire suitcase with Pampers when I could just go down the road and buy Pampers? It may not be the brand we usually use, but I mean, it just needs to be functional. So that helps a lot. I think that would be the biggest tip from a practical perspective. But in general, I think it's the flexibility. I've gone on trips where I this is actually in regards to flexibility in a way too, because I've gone on a trip, like I went to Lisbon early last year and I bought like tours in advance and like my daughter like knocked out one of the tours, so we ended up going back to the hotel room, so I wasted that tickets. And then the next time she was kind of cranky and my friend's son was feeling sick, so we ended up skipping that tour. And I told myself, don't buy tours in advance. Show up and get the ticket at the gate unless you have no other choice, because again, children are unpredictable, so it might make more sense to kind of have a loose plan. And if it works out, then you buy your tickets or things like that, so you don't end up wasting money or little things like that. But I think ultimately be flexible. It's about, at least for me, as much as I want to see a city and stuff like that or whatever where I'm visiting, sometimes I have like very specific things that I want to do, but the rest of it is flexible and it's more about enjoying the space and enjoying the culture and that kind of stuff. And it's not about a very rigid schedule that, it's 8 to 9 we're doing this, at 9 to 11 we're doing that. And I think that helps to calm a lot of the anxiety that comes with solo, because you wake up in the morning and for some reason your child is in a bad mood and they don't want to eat and all of this, and then you're trying to make a schedule and you're stressed and they feel your stress. And you can just alleviate a lot of that by saying, okay, you know what, we're going to take our time. And when we leave the hotel room, we leave the hotel room. And then we find what it is we're going to do today, you know? Um, and pack lots of snacks. Pack lots of snacks and pack new games or new toys that they haven't played with before, so it holds their attention a bit more. But other than that, I think those are the biggest things. Yeah.
So, as they would say back home, I'm trying to get into Marielle's business. So I asked her, from a financial perspective, whether or not there are any hard and fast rules that she follows when it comes to trip planning.
Honestly, not really. Not to say I have a blank check for traveler, but like the rules aren't like I spend this percentage of my income on travel or anything like that. I'm way more laid back than that. But what I do is it's more of a proportional thing. I'm traveling somewhere, I will try to get the cheapest flight or way to get to the place. So I will book a Wizz Air, a Spirit, whoever cheap flight that go in. I mean, if there's a better airline that's same price, then great. But I will book the cheapest mechanism to get to the place so that I can use the rest of the funds on accommodation. So accommodation is one that I don't necessarily need like luxury accommodation, but in some countries it's 4 stars and above. In some I could do 3.5. But the amenities and the safety and all of those things that come with accommodations with that kind of star rating, especially when you're traveling alone with a child, I think it's very important. So that's something that I tend to be a bit more stringent on. So I would read all the reviews on places if it's not like a Hilton or something like that. That's a chain. So that's one thing that I do. But for me, traveling is really about the experience of the place. So I always have dinner or lunch at a really nice restaurant one one experience like that at a like a well-known really nice restaurant in whatever city to have that experience. And then what I tend to do a lot, especially in the States, I used to use Yelp, but in Europe it's not as popular. So I tend to just like ask the people at the hotel that's like, where you like to go and eat on the weekend? Like, what's your favorite place to eat? Like, where have the best like local food? And they will tell you, oh, go to this food truck around the corner over here, or go to this place. And I will do stuff like that because I want to kind of feel like the real culture, right? Because a lot of times you can get stuck in the tourist trap, which honestly, I don't mind a tourist trap sometimes, right? But I also want to have rich experiences that aren't going to cost me an arm and a leg. So I like to do a little bit of a blend of the two. Um, and I think those are probably my major rules. I always have um, make it a point to take something back, even if it's not something that is, this is going to sound funny, even if it's not something that's traditionally a souvenir. So I'm a person that I love sunglasses. Cheap sunglasses, expensive sunglasses, I don't care. I love sunglasses. So every city that I go, I always go into the sunglasses shop. And if I see like a really cool, funky pair of sunglasses that I love, I'll get sunglasses. And then it'll be like, oh, this pair of sunglasses that I'm wearing today, because I'll actually get utility out of it, right? This is my souvenir from whatever city. My friend tells me it's an excuse to spend money on sunglasses, but whatever. It's my story and I'm sticking to it. But I do that, and like with my daughter too, I always let her pick something for herself and something for someone else. When we go to places, so she'll pick a little friend or her granny or her grandpa, or whatever, and she'll pick out a little souvenir for them. That'll be a little gift, and then she'll pick something for herself. It's usually a stuffed animal, but that's basically kind of my rules. But I try to balance, high low type of vibes.
On a personal reflective note, I asked Marielle what she has learned about herself from traveling while being a solo parent.
I could talk myself down most of the time because, like I said earlier, it's not without stress traveling alone as a parent. And I mean, I guess with anything that is anxiety inducing, it's almost like you have to do it more and more, and it becomes like exposure therapy. So you just get better at managing the anxiety over time. But like I've had trips, especially when she was a little bit younger, when I could like feel myself so angst up and I would literally have to have a conversation like, Marielle, everything is fine. The child is safe. She is crying, but she is safe. You are safe. Might be looking at you like you're a little crazy, but that's okay. Let them look. It's fine. Everything is okay. Relax. It's not the end of the world. And you'll be at the hotel soon and you would get to sleep on a nice bed in a nice, comfortable place. It's all right. And like, that is a skill that you could use in life in general. But in those situations, and I don't know if it's a Trini thing, if it's a woman thing, but like, when you're feeling a little bit insecure and then people watching you too, it's like, oh God, you want the ground to swallow you up. You're like, I can't take embarrassment. But I've had to just kind of grow a thick skin in regards to that and just kind of like manage through it and like remember the point of the whole thing. The point is about getting to this place and having this great experience, and that this is just part of, half of the course. This is just part of what it means to get there, and with time, it will get better. So
I always like to end my interviews with this type of question that prompts us to think about the generational wealth, intangible at that we are giving our kids as a result of these family travels. So I asked Marielle, 20 years from now, how would you like your daughter to look back on your trips together?
I definitely wanted to be very open-minded, like I said before. I wanted to be the type of person that can talk to anyone in any walk of life, and respect that person despite the fact that they've come from a different background and have a different experience than she does. And I hope that 20 years from now, how old would she be? She'll be 23. That even if she isn't conscious of it, that these experiences would influence that in her. Of course, I wanted to think of it fondly and have good memories, especially when it comes to coming home to Trinidad. I want her to definitely remember that, continue it fondly, as I am Trini, and my mother made it a point that I came to Trinidad every year during my life so that I don't lose my Trininess in my expat life. But when it comes to just traveling the world and kind of exposure to new cultures and new people and things like that, it's really about fostering a understanding and respect of people as humans, and recognizing that, when you go to Southeast Asia, people living on $1 US a day and they're happy. And in this part of the world, we like, oh my God, things are horrible. And it's like, a little perspective. Um, I wanted to look back at the experiences and be like, you know what? There's a lot that is possible. And even if it's not possible here, maybe I can make it possible elsewhere. And people are the way they are based on the experiences they've had and the cultures that they grew up in, and that doesn't make them any more or any less than I am. So that's what I hope that she gets from the experience.
Thanks for listening to Travel Love Legacy. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Doing this really helps me to grow. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Travel Love Legacy. Till next episode, bye.